On target. Left acceleration.
Welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast. My name is Andy Spiteri, and as always, joined by Dakota Lasky. Dak, how are you doing on this fine Tuesday?
Not too bad. It is hot AF outside, so that has been nutty. It's back to that really hot weather as the summer closes out, or whatever we call a summer these days. And yeah, it's not too bad otherwise. Just been working, streaming a lot on Twitch, and looking forward to talking about some Metroid as always.
Yeah, I agree. It's been super hot here the last couple weeks actually, and like I was saying before, we're not really built for that kind of heat up here, so it's been kind of a slog, but I'm actually looking forward to the fall, and mostly for the temperature drop, but also because that's when all the best games typically come out. Mm-hmm. We've got a rumored Nintendo Direct happening on Friday. I know we say that every single week, it seems like, and it's kind of silly because it's just blowing up all over the place. You can't go on Twitter without seeing Direct rumors or Metroid Prime 4 listed or Skyward Sword HD listed. But this one I feel like is actually fairly reputable. There's supposed to be a leak on Friday, or a Direct on Friday. The leak comes from a guy named Nate the Hate or something like that. And his track record is pretty spot on. So he didn't say if it's supposed to be a direct, or if it was going to be one of those partner directs. But I mean, anything is better than nothing at this point, right?
I don't know if I agree. At this point, if it's another partner or another indie direct, they don't know what they're doing, because they got to announce something first party. It's cool to have that stuff. I'm very happy for those devs, but people have been wanting an actual direct for months, an actual game from Nintendo to come out for months, and to do another partner showcase, another indie direct or whatever, after already doing two of those as the past directs. I think that'd be I think a lot of people would be kind of tight. I mean, at this point, I'm not expecting any Metroid news still, so it's not it's really too much for me, but I do feel like they really got to read the room. I hope they have something to actually announce if this is going to happen. I'm also thinking, what if it's game specific or franchise specific, right? Which I could see happening.
Right.
But who knows? I do think they have to have something first party at this point. Having another non-first party direct would not be the move.
I mean, I kind of agree. I really like the indie directs. I like to a lesser extent, the partner directs. I just like new games being announced. But I also feel like the fan base is so famished. They're so ravenous for a Nintendo Direct. I mean, it's been the last true Nintendo Direct with first-party games that we saw. God, I think it was back in September 2019. So we're going on a full year here. So I think that if they show off this partner direct or these indie direct games or whatever, they could be the best games in the world, and people are going to dump all over them because it's not Mario, Metroid, Zelda, etc., etc. It also kind of sucks that there's those really big games that are in the works, like Prime 4 and Breath of the Wild 2, and they're out there somewhere. It's just nobody's willing to talk about them yet. So we will see what happens on Friday. If by God, if all the planets align and the stars fall down and there is some Metroid news, maybe we'll even squeak out an early show for you guys just to make sure that you have our reactions to whatever happens on Friday, if anything happens at all. So we'll stay tuned for that. Today, we have got a good show for you guys. We are going to be answering some fan questions, and keyword there is fan. Dak, you had someone reach out to you and just direct message you, talk a little bit, and then give some questions that he wanted answered on the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who reached out?
Yeah, so on this past, or I guess last Wednesday now, so almost a week ago, just after we did the last show, or released it, that is, I got a DM from a listener of the show, James, aka Harky Man, who I think they might have made a Twitter account just to DM me. So they reached out, they said, "Hey, Dak, I'm a longtime Metroid fan who just recently discovered the Omega Metroid podcast. You and Andy have been doing an absolute stellar job and have kept me entertained during my car trips to work. Now, a few random questions and thoughts." And he gave me 7 questions after that I went through, gave to Andy, and then after that, after those questions, he said, "Anyway, enough of my rambling. Keep up the great work, James." So I originally was just going to, you know, respond to them like in DM or whatever, but I told Andy about it, and we're like, "Oh, why don't we just respond to them? I mean, nothing's happening in the Metroid world right now anyway, so why not? We'll just respond to them on the show." Some of this stuff we have covered a little bit in previous episodes, whether it was, in like the Metroid Prime or Metroid Prime 4 episode or another Q&A episode. So we'll try not to like redo a lot of that, but there's some specific stuff to these questions that we'll certainly cover, and we figure why not, we'll give James the answers right here on the show that he enjoys listening to, and figured that'd be a cool idea, so that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah, heck yeah, and shout out to James for the kind words about the show. We've had a couple people. I know that I've had a couple people reach out that said, like, I don't have Twitter, but I made one to follow the show, so that was really cool of them, and it was cool of James to give us all these good questions. And yeah, I mean, there ain't nothing else going on, so James, we're going to dive in depth into some of your questions here. So I guess without further ado, Dak, let's get this party started. His first question was, how would you guys feel if Metroid Prime 4 took place after Metroid Fusion? In other words, what if Prime 4 paid off plot points for the Prime trilogy, but also served as a chronological sequel to Fusion? On the same note, do you think the main Metroid series and the Prime series continue to exist in separate boxes, or would you like to see them dovetail and interconnect a little bit more? So a lot to unpack
2 questions there
in that question. Yeah, and maybe we'll start with the first half, which we've kind of danced around it before, but I know your answer, Dex, so I'll let you kind of answer that. I think I do. Yeah,
what is it? I'm curious to hear what it is. Hold on.
Okay, what I think Dak's answer is no. He wants Metroid Prime 4 to pay off the Sylux story that happens after Metroid Prime 3, and we want a new Metroid, like Metroid 5, I guess, to kind of take place after the events of Fusion. I think that's your answer. Am I right?
That part is correct, yeah. I think it's half and half for me. That part, for sure, I would like to see Metroid Prime 4 deal with the Sylux thing, and then Fusion be its own, like it's following the events of Fusion, the sequel, that is, and kind of keep them separate. But at the same time, and I feel like I have said this before, I would love it if the Fusion sequel was a Prime-styled game, but do I want it to be, like, do I want the Fusion sequel and Prime 4 to be the same game? That's a good question. I think if there wasn't already the Sylux build-up, I would say yes. I would be, even though it would be kind of, not confusing, but it would be, I'm not sure how they would do it, but if there wasn't the whole Sylux thing that they kind of been building up to a little bit, I would say, yeah, that'd actually be a cool idea if they could tie those two things together and kind of bring them into one branch again, so to speak, and see how they could mix them up and kind of, address some things from Metroid Prime while still mostly being a Fusion sequel. That might not be a bad idea, but I think there's a lot that they could do with Sylux and wrapping that up and still kind of giving us a little bit of an aftermath of the previous 3 Prime games. So in that way, no, I would like to, keep them separate. Yeah, Andy, you're right in the money.
I wouldn't hate if Metroid Prime 4 was chronologically after Metroid Fusion. And this kind of bleeds into his next question here. But, like, I think that we're maybe taking the title Metroid Prime 4 a little bit too literally.
That's fair.
I mean, that being said, I would like to see the Sylux payoff, but I also, like, I kind of come from the thought of, like, okay, like, we know that Sylux was teased in Hunters and Federation Force, not necessarily like the most blockbuster of Metroid games, and then obviously the biggest tease was the end of Metroid Prime 3, but like I feel like a lot of people I feel like a lot of Metroid fans at the time weren't like, oh yeah, that's Sylux, this is awesome. And maybe I'm wrong, but like to me, Sylux isn't like he's not what I would revolve Metroid Prime 4 around. I would bring him in kind of an auxiliary role in that, and maybe he's your rival, maybe he is kind of like maybe he plays kind of the Dark Samus role in Metroid Prime 2 where like he shows up and you battle, but like also at the end of the day your main mission is to fight the Ing on planet Aether and save the planet. I could very easily see Sylux falling into that role in Metroid Prime 4. So that being said, I wouldn't absolutely hate if I mean I wouldn't hate at all if Metroid Prime 4 took place after Fusion. That would be actually pretty awesome. But I think that it probably makes more sense to have it take place somewhere around the events of like the Metroid Prime series that we have right now.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the way they'll go. But I wouldn't just be like, oh, this is ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
If it happened.
Yeah,
that
I
way.
think for me it's like because if I don't want them to get too mixed up because I really want the sequel to Fusion to really be focused on that and finishing the events of that story and all of that. But like I think they could do the mixture, but I disagree with the Dark Samus thing. I think the reason why that worked for Dark Samus in Prime 2 is because she's like being built over multiple games, right? Like she's not really in Prime 1 but she is in a way, but like it's really a build towards Prime 3. So I think playing that kind of auxiliary role makes sense in Prime 2 for Dark Samus, whereas with Sylux this would be like a one and done kind of game. Like as far as I'm concerned, he would be in the game, he'd be the focus, and he'd be killed or whatever by the end of the game. So I don't know if you can put him in an auxiliary role because I don't think you need multiple Sylux games. I don't know if you need to build them up like over multiple games. You introduce them and you have that story play out and the story ends. That's my opinion. But yeah, I wouldn't be.
Well, let me throw this back at you as a scenario though, just really quick. What if Sylux plays the auxiliary role and he, like I said, he's not the main villain in the game, but like eventually Samus and Sylux kind of come to an understanding where Sylux is going to take on let's call it a Venom role to the Spider-Man of Samus Aran. So like he can kind of show up throughout the series in that kind of auxiliary role time and time again, rather than having it be one and done.
I think that works for like a comic book character because you get so many more comics, so many more instances where they can show up, and a lot more time to build them up too. Like even the creation of Venom, I don't think takes place over like one edition of a comic, right? It's like multiple issues. So.
Oh yeah, it was a big story.
Exactly. So it's like with Sylux, I don't think. I mean, it's a cool idea. I wouldn't be against like him showing up again in the future, but I would like to see a full, complete story with him in one game. I don't want to have to like have his story stretched out over multiple games. Like if he's an auxiliary character, I would like him to, with Samus, I want to see that story stretched over across multiple games. She's one of the main characters. For an auxiliary character, right. I don't know if you really need to do that. I'd like if he shows up again in multiple games, that's cool. As long as the game he really shows up in for the first time, I get a full, complete story with it. And whether or not he survives that and then does stuff in future games, that's another thing. But I would like a complete story. I don't want like another game where the story isn't complete. I gotta wait for Metroid Prime 5 or whatever. The next other game after that to see what happens. I would like a game to just take what has already happened and complete some part of the story. And I think Sylux is a great opportunity to take a character that isn't super deep and doesn't need a lot of time as far as I'm concerned, and just keep them in a nice, concentrated, focused effort in Metroid Prime 4 and tell one complete story, which would be nice to have one complete story as far as I'm concerned. But I don't think that's a bad idea. Yeah, I wouldn't be against that either.
I would be actually totally fine with either scenario there. I'm just kind of throwing
I don't think
what
that's
ifs.
a bad idea.
I mean, I also kind of feel like it's inevitable, though, that Metroid Prime 4 is going to, in a way, set up Metroid Prime 5.
Oh, for sure.
And it can still do that. I mean, like, I'm thinking, to me, like, Metroid Prime is a very self-contained game. Like, if that never had a sequel, that would have felt complete. To a lesser extent, Metroid Prime 2, but also that was, like, a complete experience to me. So, yeah, I do think that, like, Prime 4 is going to set up Prime 5, so it might bring an opportunity to have Sylux come back if that's the route that they decided to go. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I mean that's kind of the big thread left over from the Metroid Prime series. I do think that it's actually pretty cool that like it's not just like the trilogy that has the leftover plot points that they pay off from. It's from Hunters, it's from Federation Force. Sylux kind of being in Metroid Prime 4, I think is going to retroactively make those games more important and maybe even make people check them out just to see like, oh yeah, I heard there was this really cool Easter egg where like Sylux steals a Metroid egg or something like that,
Right.
or I want to play as Sylux. So I think that is just kind of a cool little uh, factoid, I guess, for lack of a better word, that I appreciate. On to the second part of the question there. On the same note, do you think the main Metroid series and the Prime series continue to exist in separate boxes, or would you like to see them dovetail and interconnect? You know, I would, but with an asterisk there, not in a gameplay sense, because I think that we got that in a gameplay sense with Other M, where it tried to be kind of 2D, it also tried to be first person. I think that you can mix over the characters, the lore, the music, like almost everything. Maybe some gameplay elements if they're not basically like. I think that there's a lot that can be mixed and matched, but when I think of like trying to mash that gameplay together, I think of Other M, which is something that I don't want. Maybe it could be done properly, but I think that there is a lot of different cool things that you could bring over from the Prime series into 2D Metroid, which we kind of talked about in our Metroid 5 ideas or Metroid Fusion remake. But yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think this is a pretty important question because, once you do Prime 4, it's okay, do you do Prime 5 or do you do another game that follows the events of the main line that's in a Prime style, which is what I think, like, is this question is kind of leaning towards. I don't think, like, I think it's nice to have the separation in terms of gameplay. Yes, like you have your 2D Metroids, you have your 3D Metroids. Don't want to really mix that too much together. But in terms of the story, I do think eventually the Prime series might, start mixing in with the main line. Like I think eventually the Prime story will end, but the kind of Prime games that exist won't end. And certainly if Prime 4 is a big
Right.
seller and a hugely popular game, I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo's like, why don't we just keep making these kinds of games? And that makes sense because, first person shooter games are more popular than kind of 2D adventure games these days. It might sell better just on that alone, or they just look at Prime and be like, oh, Prime 4 sells really well if it does, and that people want more of that. Maybe that could lead to the Fusion sequel being a Prime game or being Metroid Prime 4, whatever that is. So those kind of tie together. I do think they're going to mix eventually. I don't think the Prime series story-wise will always be so disconnected from the main line. And then it comes down to, okay, well, if it's the main story, like, do we do like a 2D game here, and then the next one's a Prime game, the next one's a 2D game, right? Like, is the Fusion sequel a 2D game, but then the Fusion sequel a Prime game, And that's where it kind of starts to get a
Right.
little messy. But I do think they're going to kind of merge eventually with, how popular a certain kind of genre is over another, where the stories are, unless they do want to keep just making Metroid Prime 5, Metroid Prime 6, which they could very well do and just keep putting games in there. And I think that would be okay too. But I do think because of how strong the Prime brand is and how popular that kind of gameplay is in general, that they're going to keep making Metroid Prime games, whether or not they follow directly behind the trilogy in 4, or if they're direct sequels, or they're not, or they're just a game that's not even called Metroid Prime, but is played that way, which I doubt. I think they'd always keep the Metroid Prime name just because it's so evocative of a type of gameplay and it's a strong, brand. I do think they will mix together, though. Yes, and I hope so. I think
It's
they
too
will.
bad,
I
and
hope so.
it's too bad, and I see this on the Zelda side too, where like the lack of a 3DS or like a handheld console now really kind of muddies that water
Yeah.
because your handheld was always like your 2D Metroid, your top-down Zelda, your 2D Mario, where like the console was like the big hitters, the primes, the 3D video games and stuff like
Hmm.
that. And now that separation doesn't exist, it is a little bit more tricky. I mean, I think that you saw Link's Awakening release after Breath of the Wild, which goes to show you that Nintendo will release. I don't think they'd have any qualms about releasing a 2D Metroid on the
No.
Switch. But I actually think that this kind of bleeds over into question 3 from James here, which he says, how would you feel if Retro Studios weren't developing quote unquote Metroid Prime 4, but are instead working on the first installment in an entirely new first person Metroid series? I mean, I basically think that's what is happening right now. I don't think that this is going to be called Metroid Prime 4 when it's all said and done. I think that they're calling it that so that fans know that, like, hey, this is going to play more or less like the first three Metroid Prime games. It's going to be a first-person shooter. It's going to focus on exploration. It's going to go back to kind of the basics, which was Prime 1, 2, and 3. I don't think that by calling it Metroid Prime 4, they're saying, like, okay, this is going to directly follow the story of the Prime trilogy. It could happen before the Prime trilogy even happens. It could happen anywhere. I think that they're calling it Metroid Prime 4 for branding purposes to let people know, like, this is the type of game that we're making. We know that you Metroid fans want another Metroid Prime game. We're listening. We're working on it. And, here it is. I actually feel like quite sure that when this game comes out, it'll be called Metroid Prime something and not Metroid Prime 4.
I've actually never thought about it that way. I've always just assumed, like, oh yeah, Metroid Prime 4, they literally mean that. But you're right. It could actually, as you say that now, I think you're probably right. They might not necessarily be making a Metroid Prime 4, but another Metroid game that is Metroid Prime but doesn't directly follow it. I could definitely see that, because, like, that was going back to what I was saying just before. Like, what do they do after Metroid Prime 4? They keep making Metroid Prime 5 and 6, or they do another type of game similar. You're right. I think they could just do that. If that's the case and they are just making another Metroid Prime, game, and isn't necessarily Metroid Prime 4, but it's Metroid whatever or Metroid Prime whatever, and it's the same kind of gameplay, then yeah, put it after Fusion. It could be the Fusion sequel or take place in that storyline even more so, for sure. I always just kind of thought about it as like, oh, they're literally making Metroid Prime 4, in which case I think there's a great opportunity to do the Sylux stuff, but I don't think it's necessary. I'm not someone who's like I love hunters, don't get me wrong, but it's for the gameplay, really. The characters are cool, but I'm not, like, dying to see a Sylux-based game. I think it's a neat idea, and I'd be interested to see how creative they could get with it. And certainly I would like them to see, get more in depth with these kind of characters and see how creative they could get with them. But do I need it? No. But do I need more Metroid Prime in general? Yes. So, yeah, I think that absolutely could be the case. They could be developing what is, just under a working title for Metroid Prime 4. And you're right, like, just branding it as Metroid Prime 4, everyone knows immediately what it is in terms of gameplay, and they know it's probably going to be good. So, yeah, I think that actually, you could be right there.
I mean, just, like, in terms of the name recognition, like, you think of Metroid Prime 4 and you think of quality, right? Like, because those are some of the three best reviewed games ever. Right. So, yeah, I kind of feel... I feel pretty strongly about that. I think I even said it way back when on one of our first episodes, and I still feel like it's true today. I'm with you. I would like to see, an exploration into Sylux. I wouldn't be heartbroken if we didn't, but I think it would be cool. I think the Metroid franchise could really use a new villain, just someone else other than the usual suspects to kind of carry the load for a little bit off of, like, your Ridley or your Dark Samus or your Space Pirates. So I think that would be pretty cool. But yeah, I think that's the case. I think that when we finally see Prime 4, it'll be the start of something else rather than... I mean, it can be both. It can be a continuation of what we saw before, but I do think it's going to be... Maybe this is a bad analogy. You could probably correct me here, but, like, I think it'll kind of be the Halo 4 of the series.
I hope
where,
not.
Like, it kind of starts its own thing.
Well, I mean, it starts its own.
I knew you were gonna like that, but, like, the idea.
I hope
of
not.
it, right?
Yeah,
like,
for sure. The idea that it's not. It continues the story, but not real. Well, I mean, Halo 4 does take place, like, kind of like from Halo 3.
I actually never played Halo 4. I just want to throw that disclaimer out there. I just kind of
I mean, it doesn't take directly after, but it is a direct sequel to Halo 3. And the trilogies are, and 5 is to 4. But, like, it would be cool if they did, like, I mean, I guess, like, it's as long as it's good, and Halo 4 was debatably so. But yeah, again, like I was saying, I don't necessarily need it to be a direct sequel to Metroid Prime 3. I just want more Metroid Prime. Whatever that ends up being. Honestly, if they have another Metroid Prime game with a completely new story and all that stuff, that'd be so cool. I'd love that. But it's really, what's important to me here is that it's a new Metroid Prime game, not necessarily that it's Metroid Prime 4 or whatever. So yeah, totally down for this.
Yep. All right, let's move on. His next question was, how would you feel if the team behind the Castlevania Netflix series developed an animated Metroid show? I'd be on board 100% provided the showrunners treated the Metroid with the same reverence as Castlevania, but understood they were different beasts. Dak, do you have any thoughts on this? Have you watched Castlevania on Netflix?
I haven't watched a ton of it. I've seen like I think I watched like the first episode. And I'm not a huge Castlevania fan, but I thought it was really well animated. It looks really cool, and it looks legit. I'd be down. If they did the same style and just animated it for Metroid, I think they could do a really solid job. But I probably should watch the whole show before making that opinion. I think in general, I'm just down for an animated Metroid series, and I think overall Metroid is better suited for a series or an episodic kind of content rather than being a movie, for example, which we've discussed in a previous episode. But I know the Castlevania series, the animated series, is very well regarded. It's very accessible. It's on Netflix. It's very well animated. It looks really good, and it stuck out to a lot of people because of that. And the showrunner, I think, even tweeted like being interested in doing this kind of thing, or doing a Metroid show, or being a Metroid fan and wanting to do it. So I'd be down for that. I think Metroid would work really well for an anime where you can just show off like a lot of cool like stuff that doesn't really work in live action, and you don't have to have dialogue. I've watched animated stuff that has like no dialogue or very little, and it worked great. And you're just really mesmerized by the animation and what's happening, and you can tell a story without dialogue. And we know in Metroid that's very much the case in many games. So I'd really like to see this. I think it'd be awesome. I think the difference is, would it be as popular as a Castlevania series? I think it could be. Maybe more people know what Castlevania is and the characters, but a cool sci-fi animated series and they see it's Metroid and like, I think that'd be awesome.
You said something interesting there. I'm not sure that Castlevania is more popular than Metroid. I
Maybe
feel
it's
like
not.
they might be on the same
It probably
level.
is. They're probably in the same ballpark. I don't know. Maybe Castlevania has
Maybe
more
I'm wrong.
name
Maybe the
recognition.
sales will
I
prove
don't
me
know.
wrong, but
I feel like I have no idea because I don't know much about Castlevania itself, and I'm more biased for Metroid. But they're probably in the same ballpark.
So I am a big Castlevania fan, and I watched this series, and it is as good as they say. Probably better, actually. It's incredible. It's really, really good. It weaves that perfect balance between taking inspiration from like the games and the source material, but like making it its own beast, which I just think is like it's a very impressive show. It looks incredible. It looks phenomenal, and they've got like really, really awesome talent associated with the show. Like the voice acting is top notch. They got Richard Armitage in there. Like they went all out for this. So my answer is, obviously, of course, yes, I would love to see Metroid done in this similar vein. I would say, to get specific about the question, I know that the team behind the Castlevania series is already doing a Devil May Cry series. So I would kind of be like, I wonder if they're stretching it a bit too thin, doing Castlevania Season 4, Devil May Cry, and now Metroid. Um, my other little grievance, I guess, with that would be, let me preface this. I agree with you. I think that, we've talked about movies before, and you have some limitations in movies. You have to adhere to some quote unquote blockbuster rules or whatever. And I don't think you have to do that in a series. And I think that the potential for this would be off the chains if it was just a slow crawl. Like, you don't have to rush your story. You can take your time, build your characters, etc., etc. The only thing that I'm just like kind of iffy about is like, I just don't really associate Metroid with anime. I think it would look better if it was like in a kind of like a more sci-fi-esque kind of a presentation. Something along the lines of like, I don't even know. You ever see, what was it? Love, Death, Robots, something like that on Netflix?
I saw a trailer for it, I think, and I was like, oh, Jesus, this is way too much for me. And put on The Office again for my 100th time.
Shout out to The Office. I'm watching The Office right now. But yeah, so like some of the animation in that was really cool, and it looked really good. And that's definitely a bonkers show. Check it out if you like Black Mirror. But I think that would be more at home for Metroid for me. But, the Castlevania show just looks so gorgeous that if they were going to do that with Metroid, I wouldn't complain. It would just kind of be, it would take a second for me, anyways, to kind of get used to like the characters and the world in that anime-esque presentation. Because like I feel like Metroid is more of like a sci-fi grounded, realistic kind of presentation, more so than, some of the other Nintendo series that we know, like Fire Emblem, for example, that obviously skew towards an anime presentation.
Hmm.
That all that being said, I think that this could be awesome if they ever did it. It probably never happened, but yeah,
It'd
it,
be
it would be
awesome.
incredible if it ever
As
did.
long as they don't do it in that Dragon Prince style. You ever see that show, The Dragon Prince on Netflix? I think it was made by the creators of the Avatar or whatever. It's like that
No.
like 3D cell shaded like the frame rate's not all the way there. Oh, it throws me off. It's
Oh
so
yeah,
bad.
yeah.
If
Get
you ever
that out of
seen that
there.
show, I haven't watched that show, but I've seen it, and like the images and trailers, I'm like, ah. The only show I think that's ever pulled that off, it's also on Netflix. It's an anime called Ajin, and if anyone's watched that show, shoutouts to you because it's a low key sleeper. But that show had that kind of same style, and was pulled off really well. I don't know how they did it. I wish they do another season. There's only 2 seasons. Anyway, yeah, I think this would be a cool idea. Would love to see it. I'm sure you feel the same way because that's what you just said.
I would take Metroid anything.
Yeah, that's the thing
Honestly,
is I'll take any. We're
I
so
would even
starved
take it
for it.
animated. Yeah, like just
Anything.
anything would be wicked. Anything to bluster the good name of Metroid. All right, let's keep it moving here. He has another good question here. James asks, although I absolutely love the gameplay, narrative flow, and the 2.5D aesthetic of Samus Returns, I would have preferred if Nintendo had, say immediately after Zero Mission, made Metroid 2 in the 2D art style of Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, and Zero Mission. This would have meant these four games felt of a piece stylistically. I wouldn't have minded if Metroid 5 onwards was then developed to be 2.5D. I think this was a missed opportunity. Would love your
I love this
perspective.
question. This is a good thinker. This isn't your average question. This shout out to James with some good questions. You go first on this one because you obviously the Prime games are more my love, even though Fusion's my favorite 2D game. What do you think about this one?
Okay. I think that the you kind of get to cheat and have both because I think that the existence of AM2R kind of like you can get your cake and eat
True.
it too because you can have the Metroid 2 style remake that he wants in AM2R and many people would debate that is a better game than Samus Returns and if someone were to make that argument, I actually wouldn't tell them that they're wrong. I think that both of them are incredible for different reasons. Um, but it kind of depends on where you fall. We've kind of said this before, and we'll dive into it one day on this show. But like, I feel like the difference between AM2R and Samus Returns is that one game is kind of basking in the glory and of what's been and has perfected what's been, while the other game was innovating what's next. And if you want to have your Metroid 2 remake in the style of Super Metroid and in that presentation of like the familiar gameplay and the rock solid gameplay, AM2R is for you. And I was just playing it I think 2 weeks ago and it's awesome. It's every bit as good as Samus Returns, I think. That being said, I didn't mind that Samus Returns was presented the way that it was. I think that it's very important, especially for 2D, to always be evolving and show like what's next, what we're gonna do to keep current. And obviously Samus Returns we know set up some future entries in the series as well. Maybe a fusion remake, maybe just something else with like the Dark Chozo. So I understand and appreciate what they were doing with the 2.5D aesthetic. I think it looks great too. So it's just kind of like it all depends on like what you want as a Metroid fan. Like, would you rather nostalgia and to play a game like that you know and love, you already know that you're going to like, or would you like to see what's next and what innovations are coming and how the future of 2D Metroid is going to look? And Metroid 2 is kind of unique in the fact that it gives you both opportunities. So it's cheating to say, but like I guess my answer is I'm glad that we got the 2.5D aesthetic of Samus Returns, and I'm glad we got the game that we did because we already had the kind of game that James wanted.
I agree with what you're saying, and I also see what he's saying. I do think that, like, at the time, right? Like, because now, yeah, we can play AM2R and we can play Samus Returns. We have access to both of those. At the time, though, when like Zero Mission had come out and Fusion had come out a few years beforehand. I do think it would have been cool to like at the time strike while the iron's hot and do a similar like an official Zero Mission styled Metroid 2 remake. And I think it would have been
Oh, I think so too. Don't get me
yeah.
wrong.
So yeah,
Don't
I
get me
think
wrong.
in that regard, yeah, I do think there was a missed opportunity there to kind of have that official one. But in the now where we are and being able to look at it from 2020 and at a macro level and all that, I do think it's sure it would have been cool at the time, but now we have access to both AM2R and the 2.5D official remake. But if they like put the games together in like a collection, yeah, Metroid, the Samus Returns, Samus Returns would kind of stick out in that kind of way stylistically and how it looks. So yeah, maybe having that official version that had come out when like Zero Mission and Fusion, all those games had come out too, that would have been interesting. I think having the official version look like that would have been cool, and that would make for a cool collection. But at the end of the day, yeah, I like that we have options for both, and we still get an official remake that did something new and gives us a different option, and like you said, looks sort of forward rather than what we were getting from in the past. So yeah, I think they're right points to both. I think we kind of lucked out in the end because we have access to both games. So I do see the perspective of like having an official remake in that style back then, 10, 15 years ago or whatever it was, come out. But I think we still got the better part of the bargain at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think we lucked out getting AM2R and getting that game at all, and having that game not be shut down much earlier than it ended up being shut down. But yeah, no, I mean that would have been cool. It's cool to think of like what could have been, and could we have got like a 4 pack with like all the classic games in it? That would have been awesome. I don't know. But yeah, great question. Okay, his next question, he is going back to Castlevania here. Will you guys ever discuss the Metroidvania-esque installments in the Castlevania series? You know what? I think we probably will. We'll definitely at some point in the future discuss Castlevania Symphony of the Night, because I feel like that was a really important game in kind of the Metroidvania genre. Of course, we already had Super Metroid kind of set the blueprint, but Symphony of the Night was, I mean, not only was it an incredible game, but it was very important and stuck out in an era of 3D games. So I think that I would like to spend some time talking about Symphony of the Night, and there are a ton of other options for inspired by Metroid titles that we could try, and maybe Dak, we could even get you to play a couple Castlevania games, see if we can make you a fan of them.
I was gonna say, I'm sure I'd probably like them. It's just a matter of I never really went out of my way or got to play them. But I would like for us to do, an inspired by Metroid. I'm sure we will inspired by Metroid. Wow, inspired by Metroid episode or episodes covering Castlevania games, because then I'd have the perfect reason to go and play them. So I think we will. I know with our inspired by Metroid games and covering episodes, we haven't touched on certain topics because we want to get to them eventually. So like games like Castlevania, which are obviously, have a direct relation with Metroid in terms of how they play, we will get to. But I'm sure we wanted to save those for later and not just getting to them immediately. Same thing with like talking about Other M, right? We don't want to just immediately jump right into that in the first or second episode. But I would love to jump into more Castlevania. I respect and appreciate Andy's taste in those games, and I'm sure that I'd have a lot of fun playing them. And we just covered Blasphemous, which was certainly more on the Castlevania side of things rather than Metroid, and I love that game. So I'm looking forward to it. I think we definitely will, and I can't wait when we do.
Yeah, I think that I think that Symphony of the Night is important enough just to be its own kind of standalone episode. And then we have the problem with Inspired by Metroid is we want to showcase some different games too. So like everybody requests the big hitters like Ori and like Hollow Knight, and those games are coming. But like Dak was saying, we also want to we don't want to burn out all the great topics immediately. So Castlevania is bound to come up at some point in that series. Man, you could almost do an Inspired by Metroid Castlevania series, because on the Game Boy Advance and the DS alone, there were like 6 really, really awesome Metroidvania titles that they released yearly too, which seems incredible. So yeah, we'll definitely get to some Castlevania at some point at the future. All right, so speaking of Other M, Dak, He asks, "You seem to absolutely loathe Other M. It's my least favorite entry, and I think what he means to say here is, but I still find much to appreciate and enjoy. I'd love to know if you or Andy can recognize any redeeming qualities. Just one. What? What say you,
Okay,
Dak?
well, I will say this, and I've said this before, so this isn't anything new. I think Other M has like no redeeming qualities, but the cool finishing moves you can do on enemies, and you can pile drive or DDT a space pirate, or do the jumping on and shooting them on their head and twist their head off or whatever. All those cool finishing moves, love those. When I saw those in the original Other M trailer when that came out, I was like, bro, this is gonna be the best Metroid game of all time. Like, I'm gonna be literally throwing hands with space pirates. Like, I can't wait. And that was like 1% of the game. I was really disappointed. But yes, I think that's like the only maybe other than like some maybe one or two music tracks I have to go back. Like the Ridley theme is pretty good. It's one of the better Ridley themes, I think. And like the graphics are, the cutscenes look pretty good. Like there's some cool cutscenes that look pretty good. But other than that, like the finishing moves, yeah, that's like the one redeeming quality, and that's it. I'm reaching for those. That's all I've got for you.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that the music is pretty good in Other M, and I think that the graphics at the time looked like pretty decent. Like I don't think it's an ugly game.
No.
But you know what? On some levels, like I almost don't feel qualified to answer this question because like you have to understand when I played Metroid Other M and I was playing through and I beat the game, I went and did everything. I got 100%. But after I was done, I was like that is probably my least favorite Metroid game, and I took it out of my Wii and I put it on my shelf, and I have not touched it in 10 years. So, I probably need another playthrough to adequately say. I will, I'll give it this. I thought that the music was good and the graphics were good, like I said. I remember thinking that the world, the bottle ship wasn't like that bad to explore. It's just that moving was kind of janky. I did think that the speed booster was pretty cool. Actually, I thought that was a pretty. It was nice to see that back in like a console Metroid game after not having it throughout the Prime trilogy, and some of the diffusion missile was cool. I like some of the fighting in the game. I didn't love the combo or the melee attacks as much as you did. I think that like Samus Returns did a way better job with those. I I don't know. I don't think it's like. I think that it does have some redeeming qualities. It's just that the narrative and the story is like so dreadful that it just kills everything else for me.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not a good game. It's
yeah.
such a bad game, but I really like being able to do wrestling moves on enemies. So, give me an opportunity to German suplex something in a Metroid game, and I'll take it. I will take that opportunity. So I would love some more of that in future Metroid games. Yeah, I like the counter melee kind of thing in Samus Returns, but that's it's just a timing mechanic. It was really more for me like not necessarily the gameplay aspect, just how cool it looked and it's satisfying. Like I don't need like a complex combo to input it, but when I'm playing something and I get some shots in, I'm about to finish it off, and I'm able to just do an input, and I'm crunching this space pirate's spine with some crazy move. Like that's satisfying gameplay to me right there. It doesn't necessarily have to be complex. So that was enough for me. I was like, oh, that was like the one thing Other M did right. So if we could just get more of that and nothing else, I don't even consider that game canon, as far as I'm concerned. So we can take that Walmart bargain bin game. I'm actually pretty sure. I don't even think I have my copy of Other M anymore. I might, but if I'm pretty sure that I went to GameStop to return it and I was like only able to get like a quarter of the price. I was like, that's a bargain. Like, yes, give me that money back. Oh my god. Yeah, the finishing moves though were cool.
I tweeted out a couple weeks ago. I was in Video Game Trader. It's a video game store in my neighborhood, and they had side by side a copy of Metroid Prime Trilogy for the Wii, and it was like $120. And they had Metroid Other M, which was like $5 or something like that. One of these is not like the other. Am I right?
Yeah, that's an understatement there. That's an understatement.
Yeah. Well, we will get to Other M eventually. We're saving it for a big occasion. We might save it for the 1 year anniversary of the Omega Metroid podcast, which I mean is actually we're coming up about what 6 months now, so it's not that much longer that we have to go until we get to the other M fiasco. So that'll be, and that might have to be an episode that's stretched out a couple parts. We'll talk about the gameplay, we'll talk about the story, we'll talk about the development, we'll talk about it all when we get there.
The whole saga.
Yeah, actually, the other M trilogy here. Okay, last question here. He asks, what are your least favorite enemies in the Metroid series?
Oh, that wasn't one of his questions, was it?
Oh,
that
you
was
know
my
what?
question.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. That was your question. I'm sorry.
So that was all the questions we got from James. He wrote 7, but actually there were only 6. But the first question was 2 parts, so it actually was 7. I thought those were good questions. Thank you, James, aka Harky Man, for throwing them to us and giving us some
shout out to you, James. Yeah, that was
much needed stuff to talk about.
Stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But my question was, because this is something that I wanted to do when we were thinking about some ideas for episodes a couple weeks ago. We ended up doing our favorite beam weapons first, which I think was a lot of fun, and all of that. But least favorite Metroid enemies is another topic that I've wanted to discuss, because when I was going through Metroid Prime, there was one enemy that I'll get to that I absolutely hated, and I needed to get away from it. And now I want to talk about some least favorite Metroid enemies. I figured we'd wrap up the show with just picking up. We can't really rank it, there's so many enemies in Metroid, like maybe we'd have to give a pool of them and then rank them, but we figured why don't we just think of some and we'd throw them back and forth and talk about how much we hate these specific enemies. So I'm excited to do that as well.
I mean, take it away. I've been wanting to hear you kind of rant on this enemy for a while.
Okay, I gotta shut my door again for this because it's somehow opened, and I gotta tell you, I was playing. So you all know, the best experience, the best way to play Metroid is on mouse and keyboard. Metroid Prime Trilogy on your PC, and I have been playing that. I did another playthrough, or was continuing that on my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/therapture_, and going through that game. Specifically in the Phendrana Drifts and Phazon Mines area, there's an enemy that shows up that is I think, my least favorite Metroid enemy ever. So I'm just going to lead off with the big hitter. The Sentry Drone. The goddamn Sentry Drones in the mines and in the laboratory area for Phendrana Drifts, those little floating ones that come up, show up in pairs, they lock the doors, they put off this horrible siren, and then they can be cloaked or underwater, or and they're always in pairs, and they scramble your vision, and they do this super loud siren, and they shoot a laser that stuns you, and this crazy stuff, and it is literally the least fun and least satisfying thing to kill. I hate it. I can't run away from it. I can't ignore it. It stuns you. It blinds you. There's 2 of them. They sound annoying. I dread this enemy. I hope you all know which ones I'm talking about. They are awful, awful, awful creatures, and that was when I ran into those. Even on mouse and keyboard, I was like, "This is not it, Chief." I hate those things, and the Sentry Drones were my inspiration to talk about this, if not just to have an excuse to talk about how much. Like, if there's one thing I hate more than Other M in Metroid, it's like Other M and then Sentry Drone from Metroid Prime. Those are the top 2, I think, right there for me. I loathe these things, and I hope we never. And we actually did see them again because they're pretty similar to the drones. I don't remember what they're called, but like the purpley kind of drones from Metroid Prime 3 that are kind of similar, but not as like strong. These things, and they show up in 2 different areas, and they always show up in pairs, and they lock the door. I hate them. Sentry Drone, least favorite enemy.
Yikes. I was thinking of an enemy that I truly, truly hated, and I don't have any that I just absolutely despise on that level. The Sentry Drones are awful, and they're especially awful because they lock the door, so you have to defeat them if you're going to progress. The enemy, and I didn't do my homework here, I'm sorry, so I can't remember its name, but you see it underwater in Metroid Prime. It's the one that kind of clams up. It looks like a little triangle almost. It clams up. You have to shoot it right in the center, and if you miss with your charged ice beam shot, You have to wait for it to go back and spread out again. It also kind of makes your visor go a little bit wonky whenever you get close to it. These guys are awful, and I feel like I always use my ice beam to shoot them, and I feel like the ice beam fires so slow, and it always takes absolutely forever to hit them. So yeah, this one popped into my mind immediately when you were just like, "What's your least favorite Metroid enemy?" Another one, also from Metroid Prime, is I hate the tentacles
Oh,
that come out
in Chozo ruins.
in the
Oh my
Chozo
god, I hate
ruins.
those
Ugh.
things. The Reapers.
Because you have to hit them in like that specific spot, and unless you're like right beside them, it's extremely hard to hit them. You can't kill them; they just retreat. They always come back. They're like a dirty shirt. You can't get rid of it. Yeah, those guys are some of my. They're on my hit list.
Yeah, I think the first one you were talking about was an Aqua Reaper. I think that's what they're called.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
those are
yes.
definitely annoying, especially because they're often situated in like an area where if you get damaged by them, you'll like fall down to another level or slowly float down or whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then yeah, the actual the regular Reaper, I think I don't know what, yeah, I know Gel Zap is what the you were talking about. The Reaper is the wall Chozo thing, and yeah, those are annoying. Though I will say in mouse and keyboard, when you have a little more control from long range, you just like quickly snipe them before you even head over there. So actually not as big of a deal. But they are annoying, and they always hit you into like something acidic or into the poisonous grass, the little grass you got to shoot that goes back into the ground. Yeah, definitely remember a bunch of areas in Chozo ruins with those. I'm gonna give another one. I don't know if this counts as an enemy. It kind of is, but not really. I'm gonna say it because I don't like them in Super Metroid, the little robot trash cans that like walk really
Oh
slow
my god,
and get
that's incredible. I was
I
just about to say that
so
next.
I why are they in the game? I've never understood when I play Super Metroid and Zero Mission. I think they're in Zero Mission too, because I know they're in Zero Mission because I
Yeah,
played that before Super Metroid.
specifically in the escape sequence in Zero Mission.
Yeah, it's I that I can understand at least in the escape like sequence. I think a little makes a little more sense because obviously they're there to slow you down and like frustrate you. But in Super Metroid, they just show up. They're just in a room where there's no stakes. So I'm just like I'm not running away from anything. I'm not trying to get out of anything. They're just there and slowing the game down for no reason. I don't understand why they were made like they're I hate these things. They're not really enemies, they're just like these annoying obstacles, and they also don't fit with like anything. Like they're not similar to anything else. They don't look like any other enemy or non-enemy in Metroid, and they're like I feel like they're a carryover from like 80s sci-fi. Like maybe they would have worked in the original Metroid, like because they look like some robot from like Doctor Who or something, or I just like a
They look
generic.
like R two
Yeah, oh
D
yeah,
two
oh
is
yeah,
what they
like an
look like.
R2D2 robot. Yeah, it's like a generic kind of sci-fi robot. But then I'm playing Zero Mission and I'm like, why? Or Super Metroid, I'm like, dude, this is not like who tested this and was like, yes, this is fun gameplay. Yeah, I hate those things, and the robots really suck. But you know what they should do is they should bring them back in the Fusion sequel, or even Metroid Prime 4. But I think it would be better in the 2D Metroid. Bring them back, but as an actual enemy. Like I want to fight a I mean, I guess that would just be one of the other robot bosses we've had. But I don't know. I think it'd be funny if you fought like a juked up version that like you just run into one like, oh look at these things, like they're harmless, and then it gets really big or like gets really like all like starts like stuff starts coming out of it and like transforms into something and you fight it. I think that actually be pretty funny. That's how it would be redeemed in my eyes.
Yeah, fair enough. I put the robot on my list, which is funny because I didn't think you were going for any Super Metroid characters, but I just put it on my list not because it actually is kind of helpful in some spots. It lets you shine spark and paves the way to enemies, but just like how slow they move is just like grating on my soul. So and particularly in Zero Mission when you're like trying to escape and it's like, oh my god, dude, just get out of the way. So yeah, that one, and like the little, God, sorry, I should have done my homework and found out what they were called, but the little enemies in Super Metroid that cling to you and you have to get into Morph Ball form and bomb them away. They're basically like Metroids, except they're much smaller and they are just a pain in the butt to get off of you. So yeah, those ones aren't my favorite either. There's there's a little room in Kraid's lair where you get an energy tank where you have to like ward off about 5 of these little bug things. So they're pretty annoying. So those are my least favorite. I mean, other than that, like, they're enemies that I have a hard time with and that are difficult, but like there's none that I truly hate, I wouldn't say. I think that for the most part the enemies in Metroid are more or less fair.
Yeah, and we're keeping this to just, non-boss enemies too, and not talking about
Yeah.
bosses. Yeah, I think for the most part Metroid is pretty solid, just enemies all around, but I think the sentry drone just started occupying space in my head rent free. I was like, I gotta get this off my chest. But what I would love is to maybe hear from some listeners, some people on Twitter, what their favorite, or I'm sorry, their favorite worst enemy in Metroid, or their least favorite Metroid enemies, or the ones they think they suck the most. I would love to hear people's list, because I'd love to hear some enemies that people I didn't think of, or ones I'm like, oh, that's actually good, but someone else out there must hate it. So, or I want to know, are there any work robot fans? Where is the work robot fandom? Where is the work robot community? If you're out there, please let us know on Twitter or elsewhere. I would like to hear from people on that, and that'd be maybe cool to talk about a little bit at the beginning of the next show. But yeah, I can't really think of any other enemies. Those are the two that really really stuck out to me the most. But I think for the most part, Metroid enemies are pretty cool. I think more often than not, and when an enemy shows, I'm like, oh, this is cool, or oh, this is pretty neat, or I had fun fighting that, or I'll remember that, or something like that. And that's another great part of the Metroid series in general.
Yep, I agree. You nailed it on the head right there. Let us know what you think about who's your least favorite enemies, and also let us know what you think about some of the stuff that we talked about. Where is Metroid Prime 4 going to take place on the Metroid timeline? How big of a factor is Sylux going to be? A Metroid animated show? What's your favorite 2D Castlevania game? Let us know, because we love just getting feedback like this, and we love when you guys reach out to us. As you can see, one person just was like, hey man, I got some questions for you. We decided to do an entire show off of it. So if you have something that you want discussed, let us know, because I mean, chances are we'll probably cover it, because we ain't getting a new Metroid game anytime soon.
Yeah, I at the very least though, listen to all our episodes and make sure we haven't answered it recently. So that way, because I feel like we're gonna start getting mad messages, and like everyone's gonna want their questions answered. Though I'll be down to answer everybody's. And to be fair, there are some questions that I feel like maybe our answers will change over time. But yeah, I would love more people, more questions answered. There's a lot of good discussion topics. James had some really good ones here today, and I enjoyed what we got. And I love doing these Q&A kind of episodes. So let's just jump into multiple different topics at once. And yeah, like you said, it's not like there's anything happening in the world of Metroid. Hopefully that changes on Metroid on Friday. But yeah, always down to do these episodes. There were some great questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you, James, and thank you guys for listening this week. We're going to get out of here, but of course, we want you to head over to Spotify, Podbean, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe to the Omega Metroid podcast, and tell a Metroid fan in your life where they can get their Metroid fix. That's it. We're out. Check us out over on Twitter at Omega Metroid Pod, at Spiteri316, at the Rapture _. We will see you guys back here next week for some mapping Metroid. Or maybe we won't. Maybe there's a Nintendo Direct. Who knows? Until then.